What's almost synonymous with Christmas now, sadly, in my opinion, is the consumption of smoked salmon. Not even smoked. People consume salmon in its various guises, Atlantic salmon, should I add, throughout the Christmas period, because we've all been kind of hoodwinked into, by clever marketing, into thinking that it's some sort of luxury food, and we equate luxury food with Christmas, obviously. So we want to debunk that myth, and we want to try and give people an alternative now that we know what we know about the perils of unsustainable open pen aquaculture in the form of salmon farming, at least. So we invited none other than Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall to come and tell us what he thinks about salmon farming and what alternatives he might offer you to cook this Christmas.
Christmas is a time when we like to celebrate with great food, and I'm one of the many people who like to eat at some point over the Christmas holiday some fantastic fish. You know, fish is a wonderful food. I've eaten good fish all my life. I like feeding it to my kids and my family. I like catching it myself and cooking what I catch. And I always start thinking about what is a special piece of fish that I can have over Christmas. The problem with farmed salmon is that it isn't really a very special piece of fish. It is, it's pretty tainted by the associations with environmental problems that has become, really unarguable down the years. I mean, going way back, we've been talking about the decline of the wild salmon and the unstoppable rise of farmed salmon. And of course, the two are related, albeit in quite a complicated way, for most of my lifetime. And sadly, as the prevalence of farmed salmon gets greater, the decline of the wild salmon continues. And we're still unpicking the relationship between those two events, but there's no doubt that there's a strong connection. And I think that if we participate frequently in a not very thoughtful way in the eating of farmed salmon, we are contributing to environmental problems generally in the oceans, pollution, and we are contributing specifically to the decline of the wild salmon. Which is not to say that I dismiss the farming of salmon for food out of hand, or say that it's something that needs to stop completely now, because I think those sort of assertions never bear fruit. We need to, I do think we need to stop it growing any faster or spreading any wider than it is. It's already overreached itself considerably. And I think we need to consider some major reforms. And if it's going to continue to be out there, it needs to put a lot of its problems around the environment into reverse. And I think there are ways to do that. There are systems for farming fish that are not so costly on the environment and still produce relatively inexpensive, healthy fish. But I think on the whole, there are things like land-based systems that don't directly impact on the marine environment, if they're well managed, can work. We've chosen in a way the wrong fish and farmed it in the wrong way and done it on a huge scale. And this is why we're experiencing these problems. There was a lot of buzz over the development of salmon farming in the beginning, and then there was a sudden rush to the bottom in terms of low prices, low welfare, and low concern for the environmental impact. And we've been experiencing problems with that for decades now, problems that seem to be getting worse rather than better.
When consumers, and I think, as you quite rightly point out, it's the consumers that we really need to educate and need to be informed on what they're buying and putting in their mouth, fundamentally speaking. And they're being sold Scottish salmon. I find it a very tricky pill to swallow when I walk into a supermarket, and knowing what I know, and I appreciate I'm a little more informed than the average salmon consumer or potential salmon consumer, but when it says organic Scottish salmon, and you and I know that that's from a fish farm that is a Norwegian fish that has been designed for the table. Yes, it's in Scottish waters. How much grace can we give these people when they're calling their fish organic Scottish salmon?
Well, I think the word farm should appear in the label, but I think that should be there from the off. People need to understand that they are buying a farmed, and in some cases intensively farmed, and in the organic case slightly less intensively farmed fish, but that first and foremost it's a farmed fish. But there are so many issues around fish sustainability that people need to get their heads around. One of the simple problems is how much of our fish consumption revolves around so few fishes, and all of them are problematic. So that it's five fish species represent over 80% of the consumption of all fish in the UK, and they are tuna, cod, prawns, salmon, and haddock. And salmon is right up there. Salmon is also almost as big a food export now. I think it's almost the single biggest food export by value in the whole UK. The industry does have an almost unstoppable momentum, and yet we do really need to hold it to account. And we also need to encourage people to consider alternatives. Because in the end, the one thing that would make the industry take stock of its standards and its impact is if people stop buying it in favor of other products that they believed and understood were more sustainable. So consumers often forget the power of their own voice. And what I often like to say, whether I'm talking about salmon or other issues in the world of farming and food, is that the way you spend your money is a vote. If you buy a product, particularly if you buy a farmed product, you vote for the system of farming that produced that product. And the more millions of votes that gets, the longer it will continue into the future. If the people voting for that system take away their vote by taking away their purchase, then you have the power to affect change. And over the years, we have made a very small, in our campaigning around poultry welfare, small but measurable difference to the way that poultry is bought in this country, and the higher welfare, the percentage of higher welfare poultry has nudged up by a couple of percentage points over a decade. It's a small effect, but it nevertheless represents an improvement in the lives of millions of birds over the year. So in terms of those incremental changes, I think we need to encourage similar awareness on the part of the consumer. And there are other things out there which we can buy to celebrate, the deliciousness of fish, and to also give a vote, if you like, to more sustainable approaches. The problem, of course, is that there are increasingly few fish out there that you really can just spend your money on without worrying, because most, both wild fish stock, a lot of wild fish stocks are in trouble, and a lot of farmed fish products are problematic in their environmental impact. So there aren't many free passes in the world of buying and celebrating fish for consumers to go out and enjoy with a clean conscience.
If we're bringing it back to Christmas and people are going, okay, you don't want me to eat farmed salmon, or I'm going to make up my own decision and perhaps not choose farmed salmon this Christmas, but I do want something that is similar in taste and colour. What are your thoughts on trouts, farmed trout?
Well, I think farmed trout has many of the same problems of farmed salmon in terms of the way the feed is sourced, but there are some relatively small scale trout farms that are well established and using natural flow systems. There's quite a well-known one called chalk stream trout. It's a premium product at a higher price. Their smoked trout is good. Is it entirely unproblematic? Not in terms of the sourcing of the feed, but it is. These things are so relative, and I would say it does represent a more responsible choice. If you want some nice smoked fish from that family, the salmon and trout family, that's a good way to lean. I would also point people towards smoked mackerel. Not that the mackerel fishery is also without its problems in terms of allocation of a quota, which continues to threaten the certification of mackerel as a sustainable fish. But hand line caught smoked mackerel in the UK is not expensive. And you can make a wonderful festive smoked mackerel pate with a good squeeze of lemon and a twist of pepper and maybe a little dab of horseradish. And if it's that little special canapé that you want with your Christmas drinks before dinner or when you're singing carols round a tree, a little bit of smoked mackerel pate homemade would be a great thing to offer your family and your guests.
And is that something that might be happening or might be being sampled in your household? What do you do for fishy canapes and for fishy treats over Christmas?
Well, I'm lucky enough here in the Southwest to be, I mean, I have a little boat in Lyme Regis, and I've been managing to potter out over the summer, and I catch a bit of fish and I smoke a bit of fish and I freeze a bit of fish. In fact, last night I got a couple of bream out of the freezer. That's wild black bream that I caught a few weeks ago, and we had that for supper. I like to eat fish once a week, maybe sometimes twice, and if I can eat what I catch, that's great. Of course, I recognize that not everybody has that privilege. I have managed to stash a decent sized bass in the freezer, which will be appearing on the family table on Christmas Eve with a bit of homemade salsa verde. And I will be ordering some mussels and oysters from my excellent local fishmonger in Colleton, the Lyme Bay Fish Company. He specializes in buying boats from the inshore local fleet, sustainable local fishery. So, and that's another thing is to, go and see your local fishermen and talk to them about alternatives. Say, what have you got that isn't salmon? Good fishmongers recognize the relative problems around some of the things they stock or sometimes choose not to stock, and they can give you good advice and they can help you out. And Simon actually smokes his own mackerel and other locally sourced fish and offers that up on his slab. So that would be a good choice for Christmas.
So obviously our TV schedules are littered with celebrity chef specials telling us what we should be eating and sharing wonderful recipes. But should celebrity chefs be so blasé and candid about using farm salmon? I'm sure the likes of Gordon Ramsay know about the challenges and the pitfalls that eating farm salmon can give, and the consumers perhaps are slightly unaware of them in the round. Should they be so blasé about pushing farm salmon, for want of a better expression, down our throats over the Christmas period?
I don't really police my fellow chefs or watch a lot of TV cookery, sure. But at the same time, it's a good thing that someone like you is doing that. So I couldn't tell you who's been cooking farm salmon or not on the TV in recent weeks or years, but I do think that chefs, once chefs have the opportunity, and it's often a very well-paid opportunity, to appear on television and talk about food and sell their books and promote their various businesses, that increases their responsibility to think about the quality and sustainability of the produce that they're using and that they're communicating to the public about. So, I've obviously very specifically made TV shows questioning the fundamentals of the sustainability of fish. So you're not going to catch me suddenly popping up and cooking with farm salmon on TV anytime soon. And if I'm cooking fish at all on TV, I'm certainly going to be talking about where it came from, why I've made that choice, and why I think it's sustainable. And I would love to see more chefs taking that approach, and not just on TV, but when they write about fish cookery. And of course, we've got a world now, again, especially coming up to Christmas, where food recipes in the press, in the Sunday supplements, in the magazines are a huge business. And I don't think you can just approach that anymore with a sense of not talking at all about the sourcing of your ingredients or the impact of the choices you've made or where they come from. I think there are newspapers and journalists working for those newspapers who are chasing down stories about what's sustainable and not sustainable. And yet in other pages of the same papers, you may get recipes published that are putting forward ingredients, including fish, as if the environmental impact of those was not something that newspaper needed to worry about. So a little bit of consistency across the press in the way that it deals with issues over food and farming and sustainability, and then the recipes that it publishes for people's enjoyment, those things really need to line up, I think.
I agree. There should be more cohesion certainly between what's written in the newspapers when it comes to what's sustainable, what's ethical, animal welfare, all the things that salmon farming ties into. I personally think what you do and what you have done is a little bit more than just coming on the television and telling us how to cook food. You educate us, and I think that's why we wanted to come to you to come onto this podcast, because you know your onions, you've done your research, you're an angler, you're absolutely somebody who understands the food chain from source to table. There's a campaign called Off the Table, speaking of which I think is Wild Fish from memory backed, and that is to encourage chefs to take farm salmon off the table. Quite literally, you don't serve it, encourage their customers not to eat it. And it seems to be growing in momentum. Being a chef yourself, what might you advise Wild Fish or any NGO if they're trying to persuade influencers such as chefs, such as people on Instagram, people maybe people who listen to podcasts? What advice might you give to them in order to get the message across more, in order to get people to commit to the movement of not serving farm salmon?
Well, I think they're doing a pretty good job of getting their message out. I've certainly heard it from time to time. It filters through. I think that it's really important to have people championing the cause of more sustainable sourcing in the food industry and in around fish in particular, and also recognizing that it's a complicated area. I always thought it was really interesting and laudable that Greenpeace have worked so closely with inshore fishermen, trying to help people to understand that so many of the problems that we have in our fisheries across the oceans are driven by the vast scale of unsustainable fisheries owned at almost a national or multinational level, at the expense of traditional fishermen working out of small boats, going out for a day at a time, who have been given such a ridiculously small part of the quota that they can barely make a living. So I think a little bit of recognizing the complexity of the problem and open-mindedness, rather than this idea of a sort of blanket negation of the idea of fish as food, as we have seen in some campaigns. I mean, there were some hard-hitting elements of the TV documentary Seaspiracy, but in the end, it slowly unfolded and became clearer and clearer that essentially it was a piece of work designed to persuade people not to eat fish at all. It was really pushing people towards the idea that there is no sustainable fish in our seas. I take a different view. I take the view that fish is an outstanding food for human beings. The World Bank, not that many years ago, produced a study that if the world's oceans were managed sustainably, we could actually be taking 50% more fish out of them than we currently are, and nurturing developing fish stocks and building up the health of fisheries all around the world. Given the politics, the international politics of fishery, that's probably a bit of a fantasy. But I do think that if we were to negate the idea of fish as food altogether, then we would have a real problem feeding the growing population on this planet. So I think that responsible, sustainable reforms to sustainable reforms towards sustainability in wild fisheries and more responsible aquaculture have got to continue to play a part in delivering fish food to the world, but we can't see it run rampant out of control outside of the environmental capacity to contain it. And that's what's been happening with salmon farming across the world, and not least in Scotland.
Absolutely. Could I ask you how you will be spending Christmas Day and the holidays? Our listeners would be interested.
Yeah, I mean, we have traditional family Christmas. My mum and dad, God bless them, are still doing well. They're living in Gloucestershire, and we're all going to gather at theirs. My sister and her family, and me and my family. We've got quite a lot of keen young cooks between us. I think my nephew will be making a chocolate Yule log. My kids will be getting involved as well. One of my sons is a keen fisherman and fish cook. The aforementioned sea bass, I might just hand that over to him when it comes out the freezer and see what he wants to do with it, whether he wants to bake it and in the oven, maybe with a salt crust and serve it with a salsa verde, or maybe cure it in some way. Take the fillets off and cure them with a bit of bay, sugar, salt, and juniper, kind of Gravlax style. That actually works quite well with decent sized bass fillets. So as you can gather from what I'm saying, food will be
prevalent. And will that younger generation, are they aware of salmon farming and industrial salmon farming and the challenges that it pushes on the environment?
They would have struggled to get through. I mean, 3 of them have left home, but they'd have struggled to get through their 18 or so years under my roof without being aware that I have quite strong views, and actually with reaching quite a good understanding of them as well.
Okay, that's interesting, because I think that's half the battle is educating the younger generation. What Christmas wish would you like to help the wild salmon?
Wow. I mean, I think that the decline in the wild salmon, which has recently been kind of reframed as properly endangered, which is extremely worrying, is one of the great tragedies of British wildlife. Perhaps one of the most immediately relatively solvable problems, which just requires some serious political will, would be the cleaning up of our rivers. That has got completely out of hand. I was one of many thousands who took to the streets a few weeks ago to march through London to demand that this government delivers on its election promise of taking the issue of river pollution and the pollution of our inshore seas and beaches, and stepping up to do something about it. And there are issues there for on-land farming, because agricultural runoff is a big part of that problem. There are issues for the outrageous behavior of our water companies, who've taken the money and run, basically. As far as I can see, one of the great white-collar crimes of recent years, paid off their shareholders without doing their jobs properly. An absolute disgrace. And there are issues there, of course, for the salmon farming industry to step up to as well, because they do bear a responsibility for that coastal pollution. So if everyone focused on the cleaning up of our rivers and beaches, those 3 areas of all of whom have a big responsibility to do better, it would entail reform and better actions from all of them. So in a way, that's 3 wishes, but rolled up into one. Let's clean up our waterways and beaches.
Let's offer the salmon cold, clean water so that they can potentially spawn and create bigger numbers and stronger smolts to combat all the issues that they face. I think that sounds like a great wish. Hugh, thank you so much for being a supporter of The Last Salmon.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Hugh, for reminding us that we shouldn't be eating farmed salmon at Christmas or indeed any other time of the year. I think all that's left for me and Dara to say to all of you out there is Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And remember to keep in the fight for our salmon.